90 feet beneath the Giza Plateau, at the bottom of a flooded shaft, there is a sealed burial chamber surrounded by a moat of black water. In the center sits a stone coffin. It is perfectly preserved, and it is empty. Most people will never see it. It lies under the stone causeway that runs toward the second Great Pyramid, down 3 levels of shafts, past chambers nobody visited for generations, because the water at the bottom never drained. For years, the locals used the top of it as a swimming hole and a source of drinking water, never knowing what was underneath them. They had no idea they were swimming above a tomb built for a god the Egyptians believed did not stay dead. This is the story of that chamber, the story of a sealed shaft under the most famous monuments on Earth, a coffin built for someone who was never placed inside it, and an ancient belief that says the occupant was always meant to return. Not as a metaphor, as a scheduled event. The Egyptians built this place around the idea of a return, and they timed it to the sky. If hidden history unsettles you the way it does me, subscribe and turn on the bell before we go any further. Let me show you what is actually down there and why the empty coffin is the most important detail of all. The site is called the Osiris Shaft. The existence of the shaft had been known for a very long time. An ancient Greek historian named Herodotus, who traveled to Egypt in the 5th century BCE, wrote about an underground tomb beneath Giza, surrounded by water brought in by a channel. For centuries, scholars assumed he had been fooled by local guides, that the watery tomb was a traveler's tall tale. In 1933 and 1934, an Egyptian archaeologist named Salim Hassan reached part of the way down the shaft during excavations at Giza, but the lower levels were flooded. The pumps of the day could not clear it. The water won, and the shaft slipped back into silence for decades. Then, in the 1990s, the archaeologist Zahi Hawass returned with modern pumps and excavated the complex all the way to the bottom for the first time. What he found was 3 descending levels carved deep into the bedrock, an upper entry chamber, a middle level with niches cut for sarcophagi, and at the very bottom, roughly 30 meters down, a chamber that turned the legend into fact, a subterranean hall with a moat of groundwater running around the perimeter of a raised stone platform, and on that platform, a large granite sarcophagus. Hawass has called it the most exciting work of his life. Herodotus had not been lying. The tomb beneath the water was real. Here is where it gets strange. Hawass made a second discovery, and it is the one that matters. After moving the lid of the sarcophagus, he found a hieroglyph carved into the ground beneath it, the sign for the word house, and the Giza Plateau had an ancient name. The Egyptians called it the House of Osiris, Lord of Rostau. Rostau referred to the underground tunnels and passages beneath the plateau, the hidden roads of the dead. This was not just any deep tomb. This was a deliberate construction tied directly to one specific god, Osiris, the ruler of the underworld, the lord of the tunnels beneath Giza. And this is where you have to understand who Osiris actually was. Because for a long time, scholars treated this whole complex as a symbolic curiosity, a religious gesture. But the choice of Osiris was not decoration. It was the entire point. For decades, scholars filed the Osiris story under mythology, a nice legend. Then you look at what the Egyptians actually did with it, and it stops reading like a story and starts reading like a blueprint for a return. Osiris was the god who died and came back. In the myth, his jealous brother Seth trapped him inside a beautiful coffin, sealed it, and threw it into the water. The coffin drifted away. Osiris was lost, dismembered, scattered. And then his wife Isis searched the world, gathered him, and brought him back to life long enough to set him on the throne of the underworld, where he rules the dead and judges who is allowed to live again. Osiris is not the god of death. He is the god of resurrection, the one who proves that what is sealed away can come back. Now look at the chamber again with that in mind. A coffin, sealed, surrounded by water, at the lowest point of the plateau named after Osiris himself. It mirrors the myth exactly. The god trapped in a coffin in the water, and the coffin in the Osiris shaft is empty. It always was. No body was placed inside it. This was never a normal burial. It was a symbolic tomb, a stage set for a single idea that the one who belongs here is not present yet, but is expected. That is the first clue. The empty coffin is not a robbery. It is a reservation. Now here is the second clue, and it is built into the architecture. The complex was not made all at once. The earliest pottery in the shaft dates to the 6th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, more than 4,000 years ago, around the time the cult of Osiris was rising in importance. The references to Osiris in the sacred texts of the pyramids explode in exactly this period. The deeper chambers and the granite sarcophagus, by contrast, are styled to a much later era, the 26th dynasty, when Giza saw a powerful revival of interest and the Egyptians returned to their old monuments to renew them. So, the shaft was not built and forgotten, it was returned to, reopened, extended across more than 1,000 years. Generation after generation came back down into the dark to maintain a tomb for a god who was not there, because they believed the descent itself mattered. To dig deep beneath the plateau was to descend into the realm of Osiris. They were not just building a chamber, they were keeping a door open. They weren't guessing, they were preparing. They built a place for a return, and then they kept returning to it. That is the second clue. Now we get to the part the title promises. The question of when. Because the Egyptians did not think of return as random. They thought in cycles. The entire Osiris myth is a cycle mapped onto the natural world. The Nile floods and recedes and floods again. The sun dies in the west each night, travels through the underworld, the realm of Osiris, and is reborn in the east each morning. And above all of it, the Egyptians watched one star, Sirius, the star they tied to Isis, the wife who resurrects Osiris. Sirius vanished from the sky for about 70 days each year, the same number of days the Egyptians traditionally spent mummifying a body, and then it rose again at dawn, just before the sun, announcing the return of the flood and the renewal of the land. To them, the reappearance of that star was the signal. The dead time was over. The cycle had turned. What was sealed away was coming back. So when a tomb of Osiris sits at the bottom of the house of Osiris, with an empty coffin in the water, waiting, the answer to when is not a date on a calendar. It is a pattern in the sky. The Egyptians built the return into the architecture and tied the timing to the star that always comes back. The chamber describes who returns, Osiris, the god who conquers death, and it ties when to the one fixed rhythm they trusted completely, the cycle that never fails to come around again. For thousands of years, this was dismissed as superstition, a dead culture's fantasy about a dead god. Then the shaft was finally drained, the chamber was finally reached, and the design turned out to be far more deliberate than anyone had assumed. Not a random pit, a purpose-built monument to the idea of return, maintained for over a millennium by people who took that idea completely seriously. So, does this prove that something is literally going to climb out of that coffin on an appointed day? Probably not. I want to be honest with you because the honest version is strange enough. Here is the grounded explanation. The Osiris shaft is almost certainly a cenotaph, a symbolic tomb, never meant to hold a real body, built to associate the Giza Plateau with the god of resurrection and to give the kings buried nearby a share in his power over death. The water around the platform is not an engineered moat fed by a magic canal. It is the natural groundwater table of the plateau, which rises and falls and which flooded the lower chamber precisely because it sits below the waterline. The empty coffin is empty because it was always ceremonial, and the connection to Sirius and the flood is real Egyptian astronomy, a sophisticated calendar, not a doomsday clock. But that grounded version does not make the place ordinary. If anything, it makes it stranger, because it means an entire civilization, for more than 1,000 years, kept descending 90 feet into flooded rock to tend a tomb for a being they knew was not buried there. They built a coffin and deliberately left it empty. They tied the whole structure to the one god whose defining trait is coming back from the dead, and to the one star whose defining trait is disappearing and returning on schedule. They were not confused. They were making a statement in stone and water and starlight that some things only seem to be gone. And if that is what they meant, then we have been misreading Giza for a long time, not just as a graveyard, but as a machine built around a promise. A promise that the cycle turns, that the sealed thing waits, and that the return is not a hope, but a certainty written into the sky. So here is the question I cannot put down. The Egyptians had the whole plateau to work with. They chose to dig their deepest, most hidden chamber, fill it with water, place an empty coffin at the center, and name it for the god who always comes back. Why build a door for a return and keep it open for 1,000 years? Unless you truly believed that someone, eventually, was going to walk through it. The chamber is still there, still 90 feet down, still ringed by black water that no pump keeps out for long. The coffin is still empty, still waiting, exactly where it was carved. The star still vanishes every year and still rises again before the sun, on time, without fail. And somewhere in the dark, beneath the most visited monuments on Earth, a tomb built for a return sits sealed, holding its place for an occupant who was never there. If this one got under your skin, the next investigation is already on screen. Go watch it now and tell me in the comments who you think that empty coffin was really waiting for.